Hello, and welcome to the Jewel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art at Auburn University. I'm Rose McClarney, one of the editors of the Southern Humanities Review, the literary quarterly that's published by the Department of English and has been published here since 1967. We're here tonight to celebrate the Witness Poetry Prize and Auburn's artistic tradition, but even more to celebrate poems that broaden our perceptions and that may help us find a way to look forward. Tonight marks the 4th annual Witness Prize. This contest honors the late Jake Adam York, award-winning poet and graduate of Auburn University's creative writing program. This year's judge, Naomi Shihab Nye, selected the runners-up for the prize and our winner, Laura Saubet Ross. Naomi will read tonight following Laura. The winning poem and the runners-up, which are all great pieces, will be published in a special issue of the Southern Humanities Review that will be available around the holidays. And if you want to order a copy of that, we have a table out in the lobby. And you can also pick up a copy of the Witness Prize edition from last year. For now, let's turn our attention to Laura Saubet Ross. Laura teaches English and ESOL students at Lake Technical College in Central Florida and has worked as a writing coach for Lake County schools. Her writing appears in Blackbird, Meridian, the Florida Review, Natural Bridge, and many other journals. She was named as a finalist for Art and Letters Poetry Prize in 2016 and has been nominated 4 times for a Pushcart Prize. Her poetry chapbooks are A Tiny Hunger from Yellow Jacket Press and My Mississippi from Anchor and Plume Press. Her winning poem, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, does what artful witness poetry should, I would say, if I weren't wary of should, the sort of prescriptive phrasing. Trying to define what poetry of witness is, which some of us were just trying to do. Does it have to be political? Can it be personal? Can be trickily. And Carolyn Forche, when originally setting forth the term, wrote, "The distinction between the personal and the political gives the political realm too much and too little scope," and dissatisfied with the available words herself. But what I think Laura's winning poem does is move us beyond concerns with the limitations of language. Instead, she describes language as these new words between us, a scaffold of threads knotting the grid line of latitude and longitude, the same hard rib of equator. I won't quote more parts of the poem that I'd like to because I'm hoping maybe she will read it for it this evening herself. But before I turn the mic over, I do want to say that Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages is a public poem in the sense that its gaze is turned outward to observation of the students and cultures that are its subject, and yet it's also delicate in its touch and close in its focus. And so to me, the poem is personal in the unmyopic way of sensitively seeking to hear each person in it as an individual and speak each word in a variety of languages with attention. The last word of the poem is a conjunction. Listen for which one. Again, trying not to give the whole poem away for when Laura reads it. A part of speech that doesn't typically stand out. But here it makes for a powerful end because this is a poem to help us note the significance of little things like conjunctions, these connections. Thank you.
First, I'd like to just say thank you. It's such a pleasure and such an honor to be here. And thank you, Naomi and Aaron, wherever you are, and Southern Humanities Review. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and read the winning poem. This is called Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, Lake County, Florida. I have a feeling they would give me anything: bread, shoes, songs, forgiveness. Instead, they bring me cactus flowers and orchids from the nurseries where they work, where they have grown hungry for a language that is not their own. There's more to this than a state of being, past, present, future. Tell me, what are your stories? Angle is the Creole word for English, and Medusa is Spanish for jellyfish, an asterisk tipped with electric barbs that floats beneath the surface. Were is a word that troubles them, and through is an opening that's hard to articulate. I want to tell them about poets and revolutionaries who rose from these same fields of lath and linen, this scorch of citrus and nettle and yield. Mothers worry about writing letters to their children's teachers, but dancing and food are universal. Papaya, sugar, and water are all she needed, Carmela tells us, sharing her homemade candy. On my desk, they leave charms, roses and crucifixes woven from palmetto, origami cranes with red margin lines on their wings. Last night, I wondered how many people were looking at the moon along with me, writes Etienne in wide-eyed schoolboy script. These new words between us, a scaffold of threads, knotting the grid line of latitude to longitude, the same hard rib of equator. Who knew that Archangels is a city on the White Sea, or that there are 6,000 phrasings for moon, Mueze, Luno, Monde, Lore. Huguao is a round rim we venture across with wooden sticks, paired like quotation marks, dipping our offerings into the same seasoned essence. Exotic new mouthfuls, mung bean, taro, lotus, bamboo shoot, am, is, are, because. Thank you. This is another poem, and it's about also about my students, sisters, two sets of twins who work in an orchid nursery. And they're always bringing in orchids. My house is always full of orchids. This is called Orchid Farm, Sorrento, Florida. Each small explosion of blossoms looks as if crafted by hand, by women who've traveled from their homeland for this labor. Migrant, a word that means just keep going. Species, propagation, everything an exotic language, even the calling. Conjure, sisters, they've been told, but don't touch the petals with your skin. Don't worry, senor, we know how to leave no fingerprints. That kind of coaxing, an industry so delicate, it's tucked warm inside a cove called nursery. Tender inklings, fashioned with full Latin names, too arduous to pronounce, are distilled to a chant. Snip, replant, atomize, repeat. Here's another clay cup of strata and airborne roots. Go ahead, take the light that's offered you, sisters, but remember, these walls are not mist, but a hard transference. So while you are here, keep your siren hands rough and busy, but glisten to each other's songs. There's momentum in longing, the shared and heady pollen, the honey seed crooned raw and insistent into green-throated ovules. Then wait, sisters, wait, in your own luminous skins for reciprocation, for those frilled notes to open, trembly and exotic and silent in the air. The next two poems are about Venezuela. The first is When I Lived There as a Child, and then the second poem is about Venezuela now. Venezuela, the 1960s. The name itself is a kingdom brambled over in exotics, where fish and birds read like orchids and an oil flat sea's gone dull beside a land possessed of its own drumbeat. fist to heart, I howled in primal green. After all, Amazon sounds more tribal than rivered. Venezuela, its new language, an assignation of pleasantries, and even color. Gracias, azul. It was all I could do as a child to count in newly named values. Oleander, my mother said, meaning danger. It's the gravity, she'd say, handing me a comb. Venezuela on a map was a cluster of grapes inside a larger cluster of grapes. That southern continent, feral and hemispheric. Nat King Cole crooned from a needle threading my father's album on the turntable, a circle unbrailing inward until it bumped a shoreline of static, whole notes opening in concentricity. Magnetica, that was Venezuela. Rain fell in curtains that cleaved glass, puddles from the streets. Black flies leaving ripples and chewing our calves. What was the equator anyway, but a line as thin as water skin between ourselves looking in a mirrored sky, the same template of tree and cloud, the same rainbow hoisted like a banner from a distant fiesta. Only here in Venezuela, the iguanas dragged casually under the coconut palms, and the thick rot of frogs plastered the gullies. Sun of filigree loose across terrazzo. Look up. You could bless yourself on the Southern Cross between the monkey bars, whirlwinds reversing directions, epicentro, every ceiling revolving in fan blades, the slow tick of shadow and stir, always, even while you slept. Be careful, said the mothers to the fathers, home for siestas and lifting us children, combed and giddy into the current. Roll your tongue when you say tierra. Yes, it means earth, niños. But look how beautiful the swirl of both hemispheres of stars. Okay, and this is Venezuela now. Let them eat rabbits. Let them eat rabbits, says Maduro with a flourish as he signals the maid to remove his plate, knowing the gristle and the rinds will be gathered not as alms, but as relics, tissue papered into greasy napkins. In the halls of the Capitolio in Caracas, rabbits, unseen and multiplying, their pink noses quaking, ears like cuttlefish shells. Maduro had seen them once in Spain, the shells I mean, on a platter with salt cod and alioli, the corners of his mouth purpling on clay goblets of bobal. But back to the rabbits. Damn their soft ways, how they lolled in clumps so sumptuous they begged the bone-thin fingers of his people, who were still capable of awe and tenderness, despite a hunger that railed them, that rattled up from the rainforests across the llanos of the Orinoco to the rhymes of coral in Morocoy Bay. And at night, the rabbits were silken ghosts, chewing at Maduro's fingertips and earlobes, their eyes round and pitiful, a pool of stars. They were a quilt, no, a current, sighing and twitching, shitting and preening, pom-pomming over the feather bed, across the marble floor, through the doors and the precision green of the gardens, the heat-jeweled valleys, and beyond. Wasn't every household an inception, an instinct grown exponentially, daily and by the minute, the marrow sucked bald, even the coffee grounds eaten like dirt? Poor Maduro. He hadn't accounted for his people having a heart for these small, guileless things. How can you eat what you've named, what you stroked against your own skin? And besides, they couldn't help but wonder as they watched the rabbits sleeping what it would be like to wake again to nothing but wild pigeon grass, to the same hillsides of rust and tiny orchids, and have it be enough. Okay, this poem is for my brother and his fiance, who I hope are in the audience somewhere. Oh, he's taking a picture over there. Okay. This is called Luna Moths, for Dan and Beth. In the morning, my brother and his new love find Luna moths clinging to the ceiling of the back porch. What a surprise it is to find them there, each a moony glide in stasis. It's a connection so delicate they could be shimmed loose with a feather, and while still dazed with last night's heat, fall back to earth without so much as a flutter. Let them be, my brother says, likewise his new love. What I hear in them is orbit and lantern, and a new green so pale it shimmers before falling open into something recognizable. Leaf or blade or petal, or a backdrop for wing spots, eyes that hold a world-weary gaze. And if they could speak for the newly unfolded, those moths, through their fevered, mouthless faces, what would they have asked for? Hunger, a bitter memory of nectar and moonlight, much too dim to hold a candle to this electric gravity that flings them headlong. Okay. And lastly, this poem is from, I have a book called My Mississippi, which is about my mother's side of the family, rooted deeply in the South. And this is called Farm Girls, 1944. Mother said girls shouldn't whistle. Was it the shape the lips took beyond the dull hum of duty, where we snapped the beans, swept the feathers from the stoop, unpinned laundry still humid on the line? At the kitchen window after supper, wrist deep in suds and cast iron, we dream words like comely or promenade or swizzle stick, whispered at our reflections, dim and solicitous against a field freshly turned of stars. Wasn't everything a field, something waiting to be hemmed and mended, or else a spell for rain, blue interlocking blue in every hexagon of chicken wire, the pecans falling eggshell thin against a hard roof? Mother said pretty is as pretty does, and so we sat without fidgeting through gnats and braids and hymnals and our hand-sewn hand-me-downs till we could ride the horses or weave the John boat through the cypress trees, trailing a ribbon of clear sky in the duckweed. Unlike the girls whose fathers owned the sawmill or the cotton gin, the girls who wore new white gloves to church on Easter Sunday, we ate peaches right out of Daddy's orchards and balanced ourselves on the brim of the levee where the river crooned and hissed. Some said you could take it all the way to New Orleans and then the Atlantic Ocean. Daddy never let us listen to the radio when the news was on. Sometimes we pretended to be Veronica Lake, pin curled a wave into our hair so it dipped across one eye, the other a moon rising, past the pastures, the horses turned out, the sand streets and the river cities, the vast and glittering freehold of the sea. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura, for those wonderful poems. All of them, I would say particularly the first one, the prize-winning poem, reminders that it's our words that make us who we are. And that's a lesson that all of us, not just the poets amongst us, should remember. I'm Ken Autry, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you tonight. Glad to have you here to recognize the Witness Prize winner and our guest poet for the evening, Naomi Shihab Nye. I was delighted when Southern Humanities Review invited Naomi to judge this year's Witness Prize contest, there could hardly be a more fitting poet for such a task. For many years, Naomi's work has celebrated the power of language to help us understand and identify with one another across cultures. She was born in St. Louis to a Palestinian father and an American mother, and her work draws on her Middle Eastern heritage, particularly her grandmother's Old World inspiration and her late father's skill as a wordsmith, a journalist, and a storyteller. Her recent collection, Transfer, is largely a tribute to her father, Aziz, and in fact includes a series of poems based upon his journal entries. After Naomi's family lived in Jerusalem for a year when she was 14, they returned to the U.S. and settled in San Antonio, where she has lived since. Although rooted in Texas, Naomi thinks of herself as a wandering poet. Her travels have spanned the globe and include regular visits to her ancestral homeland in the Middle East. Our guest has published 30 or more books. Among these are the poetry collections Hugging the Jukebox, Fuel, and 19 Varieties of Gazelle, Poems of the Middle East. Among the numerous anthologies she has edited is This Same Sky, which includes poems from some 68 countries. Naomi has written young adult novels, including the somewhat autobiographical Habibi. She's written books for children, several volumes of short stories, and one of my favorites, a rich collection of autobiographical essays called Never in a Hurry. She's also published translations and written and recorded songs. And I should say that Naomi, as well as Laura, will be out in the lobby after the reading to sell and sign books. I would encourage you to stop by and purchase one or more. One of Naomi's poems, Cross That Line, tells a story about the great singer, actor, lawyer, and activist Paul Robeson. He was an avowed communist, so in the 1950s he was not allowed to leave the United States. He was, in other words, walled in, not walled out. Naomi's poem tells how he stood on the northern border of the United States and sang to a huge audience seated in Canada. The poem concludes, his voice left the USA when his body was not allowed to cross that line. Remind us again, brave friend, what countries may we sing into? What lines should we all be crossing? What songs travel toward us from far away to deepen our days? Naomi's work continues to ask these same questions and draw our attention to the faraway songs that may deepen our days. This week, we mourn for Richard Wilbur, a great American poet who died at age 96. One of his early poems was The Beautiful Changes, which tells how objects of beauty can transform their surroundings. Here's the final stanza of Wilbur's poem. Your hands hold roses always in a way that says they are not only yours. The beautiful changes in such kind ways, wishing ever to sunder things and things selves for a second finding, to lose for a moment all that it touches back to wonder. I think these very lines could apply to Naomi Shihab Nye's beautiful poetry, which transforms the attentive reader, and even as she bears witness to the grave challenges of our time, has a way of touching us back to wonder. Welcome to Auburn, Naomi.
That is the most beautiful introduction. I'm very grateful, Ken Autry, and I loved Richard Wilbur's poems so much when I was growing up, and I had not heard about his death, so thank you for quoting that. It's a great honor to be in Auburn finally. I've been wanting to come here for 15 years, since I first heard about the Rural Studio Project. which I'm so excited to witness tomorrow. We're going on an outing, and I thank you for inviting me here to be the judge for the Poetry of Witness project. Was a great honor, and I loved Laura's poem so much. I loved all the finalists, and thanks to Southern Humanities Review for sponsoring this prize. And when I read Laura's poem, I felt taken into your classroom, taken into the lucky relationships of students who get to experience your guidance, and I felt better about the world reading the poems that were finalists. Thank you also to Rose and to everyone involved with poetry here in this beautiful museum, to Scott and to Rajiv and Aaron, everyone here. The line in your poem which has stayed with me, "Were is a word that troubles them." And I think all the time about the world we're building together, all the elements we have, and the gorgeous interweave you gave us in your poem, and the strong stitches with which you create the scene. All of us involved in education are always trying to create some stitchery which helps students feel closer to their own lives and to the world around us, which we share. So thank you for letting me to share your world tonight. I feel lucky to have been a poet all these years, and even more to have been reading poems all these years. Every time we read poems, I think we feel better, and I think we need them more than ever. So please continue to give your friends poems, no matter what your major is here in school, and to know that they welcome all of us into their realm. I also want to dedicate this reading tonight to one of the best friends I'll ever have. Her name was Susan Kaufman, and her sister Karen Garrison, who teaches here, is here tonight. Knowing Susan made me want to be a better person, and I wished she had lived twice as long. She was one of the kindest people I'll ever know, and we shared our city and our boys' schools together, and thank you for coming, Karen and Roger, tonight. So I'll start with quickly a poem by a child in Canada. He wrote this poem when he was 7, and he sent it to me with a cover letter saying, I have many doubts about my work. So this is for any of you who have doubts about your work. J.D. Linton wrote, "Swirling and twirling. I don't think I am a real artist yet, though I have developed swirling and twirling. Some people say art is the movement of the pencil and the swirling of the paint, but I disagree with that. I think art is about the brain, its movement and feeling. There is one secret some are missing out on. Here it is. It doesn't matter how your art turns out. It's how much it winks at you and your mind and your mind's feelings." I wrote him back, "I think the answer to your doubts is in your poem." He gave me new respect for the word wink, and for that sensation that we often have when we're working on things, that we're just kind of swirling in the middle of them, trying to find our way. I would like to read a poem about my father, and it was the poem which stimulated making of the book Transfer, which has a Southwest Airlines baggage tag on the front, the transfer bag. And this is a little embarrassing, but it was the first poem I wrote for this book, and then I forgot to put it in the book. So it's still just a little drifting piece of paper. And I think when you're an artist, you have to forgive yourself a lot. My father on dialysis, it's called, wrote a book about Palestine called Does the Land Remember Me? He wrote it in longhand on scraps of paper as his blood filtered through the big machine. He was not afraid to watch it circulate. Nurses and aides asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "Planting a garden of almonds and figs, dipping sprigs of mint into glasses of steaming tea, breathing the damp stones of my old city, pressing my mind into the soul of an olive tree." For all of our memories, how they keep us going. Sometimes when I have trouble getting to my desk to write, I just think, well, I'll try to answer an email that I've been sitting around with for a while, and I'll try to answer it in the shape of a poem. We can all do that, right? Don't you have some messages in your inbox that need to be answered? To manage. She writes to me, "I can't sleep because I'm 17. Sometimes I lie awake thinking, I didn't even clean my room yet, and soon I will be 25 and a failure. And when I am 50, oh!" I write her back, slowly, slow. Clean one drawer. Arrange words on a page. Let them find one another, find you. Trust they might know something. You aren't living the whole thing at once. That's what a minute said to an hour. Without me, you are nothing. This is called Bully. One boy in our grade school was considered a bully, muttering rude insults under his breath, tripping girls as they walked to their desks. He bothered everyone equally, shook his shaggy blonde hair when teachers called his name. My mom, hearing the tales, decided he was lonely. No one ever played with him. In those days, bullies weren't popular. And committed me to attending a children's Christmas party with him in the basement of a Methodist church. Somehow, she arranged this plan with his mother as they waited for us by the schoolyard. Impressive, he had a mother who waited. He seemed like a person who sprang from a forest, growling. My parents argued about the Christmas party every night before it happened. Daddy said Mom was sacrificing me to her idealism. He kept calling it my first date. I was only interested in what people did in the basements of churches, and what I would wear, and would there be cake. Since we ate no sugar at our house, idealism, I dreamed of meeting sweets everywhere else. The night of the party, Bully wore a suit and striped tie. He didn't growl. It was his church, but he didn't seem to know anyone. I stood in my puffed pink icing of a ruffled dress by the cake table and watched him. He skulked around while the choir sang Christmas songs, looked embarrassed when Santa appeared. I talked to him anytime he came near me. "Would you like some cake?" I don't recall him bothering me again at school for the rest of our years. And here are a couple of poems from the book transfer, which I didn't forget to put in. Now, my father was a refugee, and he was an immigrant as a college student. He was very excited to go to college in the United States, and when he was coming this way, he was asked, "Where would you like to go?" Because he had received some sort of scholarship that you could use anywhere. And he said, "Send me to the middle," because he thought that he would have access to both coasts. So he went to Topeka, Kansas. And he never saw the coasts for many years. But he did manage to meet my mother, who was just passing through town. She didn't live in Topeka, in fact, had never been there until the actual day they both arrived together. What a quirk of fate. So after he died, I was looking through some of his notebooks, and I found lines drifting in the centers of pages, sort of the same way poets do. And some of them I thought were lonely to turn into poems, even though they were just single lines floating. So I wrote a series of poems that have his lines as titles, and then I wrote the poems, which seemed a little presumptuous, but I thought he would be intrigued. And I was surprised using his own voice in the poems happened, and it did feel like a different voice from my own. So this line was, "Many asked me not to forget them," a kind of witness in his case. Where do you keep all these people? The shoemaker with his rumpled cough, the man who twisted straws into brooms. My teacher, oh my teacher, I will always cry when I think of my teacher. The olive farmer who lost every inch of ground, every tree, who sat with head in his hands in his son's living room for years after. I tucked them into my drawer with cufflinks and bow ties, touched them each evening before I slept, wished them happiness and peace, peace in the heart. No wonder we all got heart trouble. But justice never smiled on us. Why didn't it? I tried to get Americans to think of them, but they were too involved with their own affairs to imagine ours. And you can't blame them, really. How much do I think of Africa? I always did feel sad in the back of my mind for places I didn't have enough energy to worry about. And my father was very grateful to many Americans who worked in justice projects relating to Palestine and Israel. Often church projects, but often campus projects. And after he died, I found a letter in his closet amongst a scrapbook of papers, which really surprised me that he had never mentioned this letter during his life. I still have it, and we'll be giving it soon to one of my friends who's writing a book about Eleanor Roosevelt. Knowing. On April 16, 1953, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a letter to my father answering one of his own. "No," she said, "I do not think Arab refugees should be permitted to return to their homes in Israel. There are few homes to return to." I imagine his face, perfect burn of indignation. He would carry his stolen home into the next millennium and never enter it again, though it remains intact till now. She numbered her answers. 2. I do not know if it is advisable to internationalize Jerusalem. She had worked for black youth, the unemployed. She helped to found the United Nations. She stood up for Marian Anderson when they wouldn't let her sing. My dad, at 25, trying to support a wife and baby in a tired American city, wanted to sing. Till now, the same questions dangle in air. 3. I do not know if there should be an Arab Palestine as an independent state side by side with Israel. Very sincerely yours. She signed the letter with a shaky hand from her perch at Valkill Cottage, Hyde Park, Dutchess County, New York. Such a nice address, unencumbered by numbers. Eleanor did not know. She was honest about not knowing. She would die at 78 from bone marrow tuberculosis. He would die at 80, still frustrated, still writing letters. We live on, puzzles of power unraveling around us, building new walls, proclaiming, protesting. One phrase worth clinging to, side by side. My mother says he wrote her often. This was not her only reply. But it was the only one I ever found. My father loved headlines in newspapers since he worked for newspapers, and he was also intrigued by advice columns, as am I. And as a child, I started clipping out the answers to letters asking for advice in case I would have those troubles later. And I have actually had some of those troubles later, and it's fascinating to read a letter of advice you clipped out years ago, see what someone else should do. And if you read a lot of advice columns in quick succession, you sort of start thinking of your whole life as either asking for advice or giving it. Like every person you encounter, you could say, am I giving this person advice or am I looking for it from them? And one day I was really seized by this spirit, and this poem was born. It starts with a real letter that is in my shoebox. Alive. Dear Abby, said someone from Oregon, I am having trouble with my boyfriend's attachment to an ancient gallon of milk still full in his refrigerator. I told him it's me or the milk. Is this unreasonable? Dear Carolyn, my brother won't speak to me because 50 years ago I whispered a monkey would kidnap him in the night to take him back to his true family. But he should have known it was a joke when it didn't happen. Don't you think? Dear Board of Education, no one will ever remember a test. Repeat. Stories, poems, projects, experiments, mischief, yes, but never a test. Dear dog behind the fence, you really need to calm down now. You have been barking every time I walk to the compost for 2 years, and I have not robbed your house. Relax. When I asked the man on the other side if you bother him too, he smiled and said, no, he makes me feel less alone. Should I be more worried about the dog or the man? Thank you for laughing. I appreciate it. And this is for all of our heroes. One of my heroes was Peter Matheson, the great American writer who was the only person ever to win the National Book Award, both in nonfiction and fiction. He was a birder, a very devout birder, and so he came to San Antonio sometimes twice a year, but often once a year, to watch birds on the rim of our city. And if you were lucky, you got to stay and watch with him, although he liked to stay out there for a really long time. Warbler Woods for Peter Matheson. Never too proud to tip his head back, to gaze, look beyond. Something nesting in leaves, unseen. Presence on a white stone beside water, single strong leg. Fine if it took a long time to walk there. Better if it took time. He knew the names of every warbler stitched inside his skin, the 7 eagles, graceful cranes. He followed them to tucked away forests and creeks, could see a slightest flicker of movement, a nesting memory, how the world was once, would never be again. He could stand under skies for hours, never weary of their habits, never tire. When did humans equal this glory? Glory of feather and snippet, glory of the rangeless distances, abundant glide. When did humans soar so high? Can anyone tell me what is the state motto of Alabama? Does anyone know the state motto? I didn't know Texas until I made this poem. Does anyone know? No? We dare to defend our freedom. We dare to defend our freedom. Look out. Okay. Maybe that's why I didn't include it in the poem. Defend, an interesting word. Someone gave me a map of the United States only with their mottos on each state. And I realized I hadn't known any of them. And some of them are really strange. So here is the poem. I did understand that Oklahoma is contemplating changing their motto at this moment, but that one is in the poem. It's a very short poem. It only includes a few of the states. But this is one of the poems that U2, Bono, streamed on his recent tour during his concert. United. When sleepless, it's helpful to meditate on mottos of the states. South Carolina, while I breathe, I hope. Perhaps this could be the new flag on the empty flagpole. Or, I direct from Maine. Why? Because Maine gets the first sunrise? How bossy, Maine. In Arkansas, the people rule. Lucky you. Kansas, to the stars through difficulties. Clackety wagon wheels, long land, and the droning press of heat. Cool stars, relief. Idaho, let it be perpetual. Now this is strange. Idaho, what is your it? Who chose these lines? How many contenders? What would my motto be tonight? Entangled sheets. Texas, friendship, now boasts the open carry law. Wisconsin, where my mother's parents are buried, chose forward. Washington, wisest, by and by. New Mexico, it grows as it goes. Now this is scary. Two dangling its. This does not represent that glorious state. West Virginia, mountaineers are always free. Really? Oklahoma must be tired. Labor conquers all things. Oklahoma, get together with Nevada, who chose only industry as motto. I think of Nevada as a playground, or mostly empty. How wrong we are about one another. For Alaska to pick north to the future seems odd. Where else are they going? Thank you for being friendly and laughing. And I will close just with two newer things, and then one older thing. This was after hearing some commentators on television talk about how many embassies in the world are empty these days. I mean, in terms of, we don't have diplomats in a lot of countries, or ambassadors in a lot of countries. And as someone who has worked through State Departments a lot in my life, that really concerns me, because I know of the great cultural and educational work that embassies often do everywhere around the globe. And so just thinking about it, meditating on it, and the strangeness of it, this poem is called You Are Your Own State Department. Every day I miss Japanese precision, trying to arrange things the way they would. I miss the call to prayer at Sharjah, the large collective pause. What about the shy strawberry vendor with rickety wooden cart, a single small light bulb pointed at a mound of berries in one of China's great cities before dawn? Forever, I miss my Arab father's way with mint leaves floating in a cup of sugared tea, his delicate hands arranging rinsed figs on a plate. What have we here? Said the wolf in the children's story, stumbling upon people doing kind, small things. Is this small monster one of us? When your country does not feel cozy, what do? Teresa walks more now to feel closer to the ground. If destination within 2 miles, she must hike or take the bus. Carries apples, extra bottles of chilled water to give away. Kim makes one positive move a day for someone else. I'm reading letters the ancestors wrote after arriving in this vast land, words in perfect English script, describing gifts they gave one another for Christmas. Even the list seems oddly civilized. These 1906 Germans hand-stitched embroideries for dresser tops, bow ties, slippers, parlor croquet, gold ring, pretty inkwells. Immigrants, surely twice as brave as everyone else. Posthumous medals of honor for coming, continuing. Could we do that? Seeking asylum in their memory, my father's hope for Palestine stitching my bones. No one ever wakes up and dreams of fighting around their house. Someday soon, the steady eyes of children in Gaza, yearning for a little extra electricity to cool their lemons and cantaloupes, will be known. Yes? Yes? We talked for 2 hours via Google Chat. They did not complain once. Asking about stories, books, families, memory, making up a character who does what you might do. Meanwhile, secret diplomats are what we must be. As a girl in Qatar recently assured me, each day slipping its blank visa into our hands. Thank you for listening. And I am haunted, thank you. I'm haunted by a phrase that was very popular when I was growing up. I'll just read this one and one other. And thank you for your compassionate friendliness. You can feel it in the room. Every day when I went off to school, my mother would say, "Be your best self." And that used to confound me a little bit because it makes it seem as if we each have, this whole sort of card catalog of selves, like the mischievous self, the self we are with our reckless friends, the self no one sees, the secret self. Anyway, so I'm haunted by that these days. And I think sometimes when I feel disappointed in what human beings are doing with one another, I think of our best selves and how every one of us has a chance, still to try to be that, no matter what else is going on. So this is called Elementary. At the 100-year-old National Elk Refuge near Jackson, Wyoming, we might ask, how long does an elk live? Who's an old elk here? We'd like to spend time with an elder elk, please. Tell us how to balance our living on this hard edge of human mean temperatures, what we do and don't want to mean. Closing the door to the news will only make you stupid, snapped my friend, who wanted everyone to know as much as she did. I'm hiding in old school books with information we never used yet. Before I drove, before I flew, before the principal went to jail. Sinking my eyes into tall wooden window sashes that lined the light, arriving from the far reaches of goodness, wisdom of the ages, our teachers as shepherds, school a small vessel of held golden light. You could lift up your daily lesson in front of your eyes, gaze into it and think, this will take me places. Oh, crops of India, geological formations of Australia, ancient poetries of China, we will be aligned in a place of calm knowing together. Red deer, wapiti, running elk rising above vast yellow meadows at sundown. An elk bows her head. In the company of other elk becomes her best elk. But we feel lost on the horizon now, deeper into the next century than we can believe, and they will not speak to us. So thank you for listening, and thanks so much. I always like to read at least one thing I never read before, so that was it for tonight. And here is Gate A4, which I bowed in front of in the Albuquerque airport last week, and this will be my last piece. And this is one of those strange little pieces. I know there are a lot of young writers here and older writers who have taken to creative writing, and this is one of those pieces you never plan to write, never think about writing, but just because you're a note taker or you keep a regular notebook, you scribble down the details the same day it happens, and you just want to hang on to them and think about them a little longer and make sure you got them right. So I did write this on the night that it happened and then sort of just adjusted it a little bit. But I read this tonight for all the friends we haven't made yet, and for all of you kind people in Auburn, and for everybody we'll meet tomorrow in the rural studio region of Alabama. And thanks. Gate A4. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing. "Help," said the flight agent. "Talk to her. What is her problem?" We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly. "Shu dawa, shu bidak habibti, stana shway, min fadlik, shu bitsawi." The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, "No, you're fine, you'll get there. Who's picking you up? Let's call him." We called her son. I spoke with him in English, saying I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for fun. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took up 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling of her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamoul cookies from her bag, little powdered sugar, crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free apple juice from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country traveling tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones and thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to Laura. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi, and Laura, thank you again. I'll remind everyone that Naomi's books are available for sale in the shop, and she will be signing books out in the lobby, and Laura will be selling her books out there as well. Our next and final reading of the year, actually this year, is the third Thursday of November, and our featured reader will be Christina Olson, a Georgia poet, and hope to see you all then. Thanks so much for everyone coming out.